us at the 20th anniversary edition of the Hong Kong International Literary Festival. My name's Angela Mackay and I'm one of the festival's directors. It's hard to believe this is the final day of our 10-day extravaganza. I'm sure our wonderful staff are totally relieved because it has been a lot of work trying to be hybrid as well as in person and then totally online as well. But we still have an afternoon and evening of events, so please check us out on our festival website, festival.org.hk. You can find us on Crowdcast too, and we're in Tai Kwun, this beautiful historic complex, all this afternoon and evening. Now, tonight, or this afternoon, depending where you are, we're delighted to be joined by our long-time advisor and friend of the festival, Kate Whitehead, and she's going to be speaking with the author C.J. Parsons, who formerly known as Charlotte Parsons, who is an ex-resident of Hong Kong and a former correspondent for the South China Morning Post. She lives in London now, and where she's been inspired to write her thriller, The Good Samaritan. I'll introduce Kate and hand over to her in a second, but just a few acknowledgements and a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. So on behalf of the board, I'd like to say thank you very much to Tai Kwun for hosting us this weekend and last weekend. I'd like a special thank you, shout out to the Standing Committee on Language and Education and Research, or SCOLAR, because they give us a wonderfully generous ongoing grant. Our bookseller partner, Bookazine, are wonderfully supportive and bringing in all our authors every year. Our media partners, the Financial Times, a marvellous august organ, and the South China Morning Post as well, and our broadcast partner, RTHK. Also, we're supported by a lot of consulates and other cultural organisations, so thank you to them, and also to our donors who recognise the value of reading and the written word, and that's why we're here. So we'll be taking some live questions from our live audience on note cards, but if you're watching online, please put your questions in the Ask a Question box in the lower right-hand part of the screen, and we'll relay them to our speakers, well, I should say to our moderator, Kate. And if you're watching online, you can click on buy the book, but I'm not sure you can yet can you? I don't think the book is out. Is it out here in Hong Kong?
In a couple of days.
In a couple of days. So go into Bookazine and that's where you're going to find it. Now I'm delighted to introduce our moderator. Kate Whitehead grew up in Africa and then moved to Hong Kong many, many years ago, but she's still very, very young, of course. She holds a BA and an MA in literature and is the author of 2 Hong Kong crime books, After Susie and Hong Kong Murders. She was on the staff, senior writer on the South China Morning Post for several years, and then she was the editor of Cathay Pacific's Discovery magazine. Remember when we used to fly around and read magazines? But she now contributes as a freelance journalist to the SCMP and several other local and international media titles. She also works as a psychotherapist with a special interest in trauma. That must be linked. That's another interview. It must be linked to your interest in crime, I'm sure. And she is fascinated by the question of time. So on that mysterious and enigmatic note, I'll hand over to Kate and Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And I'll just do a little introduction to Charlotte as well. Angela said a bit, but there's a few other things to add. In fact, something I didn't know for quite a long time about Charlotte was she was actually born in Britain and then she was raised in Canada. She actually lived in the UK for a couple of years before moving to Canada. And it was in Canada that she worked as a newspaper journalist at Toronto's Globe and Mail before she moved to Hong Kong, where she was a reporter and columnist with the South China Morning Post. And it was as a senior court reporter where she covered criminal trials that that experience has really informed her writing. She returned to the UK and she worked in TV news and then began writing fiction in her spare time. So The Good Samaritan is her debut novel. Charlotte lives in London with her 12-year-old daughter. So good morning, Charlotte.
Good morning, Kate.
I believe it's 5:30 in the morning there.
It is indeed 5:30 in the morning, yes.
You're looking really well. Doesn't it? You look like it's about noon.
Thank you.
You're great. Very nice to see you. And congratulations on your debut novel. I absolutely loved the book. It was a total page turner. So thank you very much for writing that. Enjoyed it. I don't
Thank
want to
you.
talk too much specifically about the book because it's not going to be available in Hong Kong for a couple of days. I don't want to give anything away. But I think I can say, because it's in the blurb on the back of the book, that it's a novel about a woman whose 5-year-old daughter disappears from the park. Can you say something about where the idea for that story came from?
Well, when I had my daughter, I was introduced to a completely new and different kind of fear, a new kind of terror that I had been completely unaware of, because when you have a child, anything happening to them is worse than anything happening to you. And for some reason, there is something on some absolute visceral level about not being able to locate your child, about the thought of someone taking them, that is the biggest nightmare any parent could face. And so it happened to me several times. I would be in the playground and I'd be looking for her and I couldn't see her. And I would start searching and I'd be looking for this, flash of red of her jacket, and I couldn't find it. And I'm hunting and my heart's pounding, and this terrifying idea of what might have happened, and thoughts already flying ahead to what if someone took her? What if someone took her? And then you find her and immediately be struck by how completely irrational this is, how totally unlikely. And as someone who works in news, I know how rare this is. I know how silly I'm being, but it doesn't change the fact that the chances are so small, but the fear is so big. And I was interested in this, and also perhaps on a sort of cathartic level, I wanted to capture that feeling, that emotion, because it was new. It was a completely new experience that had arrived with parenthood. And so I wrote long before I thought about my character, Sophia, the little girl, or my character, Carrie, the mum. Long before they were imagined, I wrote a scene of a mother hunting through the playground for her child, really just trying to channel my own terror into those words and onto that page. As I say, kind of a cathartic exercise. And that became sort of the seed. And then I built the story out of that scene, which became the beginning of the book. So that's where it began.
Chilling. So it grew out of your experience of parenting. So would you say actually it changed how you were a parent?
It certainly, I would say it certainly changed my my view of parenting. It made me think a lot about parenting, because this fear isn't just sort of a moment that parents have in a playground, parents like me, because it's something most mothers can relate to, most fathers as well. It is something that has actually changed parenting. It seems to be a more modern phenomenon. Because if you look back, I look back on my own childhood. I lived on an island that wasn't concerned about traffic. We would all go out and play. There were no parents there. 5 years old, 6 years old. We would be running around playing games, tag. And the instructions from all the parents were, come back when it starts getting dark. Nobody watching, nobody keeping an eye, nobody worrying that we were going to be stolen away. And we would be running around for hours, and we would all go home because it was starting to get dark, and there the parents would be making dinner. There's been a huge dramatic shift in the way that parenting is conducted. And it's become much more focused on surveillance. It's now sort of seen as almost negligent if you're not keeping a constant eye on your child, which isn't a good thing. Children are losing a lot of freedom, I think. And this freedom is being lost because of this terror, this completely irrational and disproportionate fear of children being stolen. And I'm aware that it's disproportionate, and I'm aware that I'm not giving my daughter as much freedom as perhaps would be ideal, but there's nothing I can do about it because the fear is huge, and it is reshaping the way people parent, and it's reshaping childhoods. So it's interesting to me. It's an interesting modern phenomenon.
The way you're speaking is reminding me that you studied psychology at university, didn't you? Is that right?
Yes, I did. I studied psychology at McGill in Canada. And the fact that I studied psychology, it sort of indicates my interest, and also fueled my interest in how the human mind works, how people think. So when I'm writing, I'm interested in motive and what makes what makes people tick. And when I do a story about a murderer, or even when I read stories about murderers, I'm much more interested in the sort of the why and how the past feeds into the present. Past experience, it sort of never leaves. It sort of carries on through and takes you to where you are in the present, and how that dark past or some one terrible thing going wrong just echoes through a person's entire life and can end in these huge sort of ground-shaking events. So that interest in psychology and that studying psychology, I suppose, gave me a great interest in sort of the cause and effect. And in terms of crime writing, it made me very interested in motive, where it's all coming from, where it began.
So when I first met you, you were working as a senior court reporter for the South China Morning Post. So I know that you've seen a lot of murderers in the dock. So how has that influenced your writing?
Yeah, I have seen the dock. I've even actually sat down and had tea with a hitman and a serial killer. It has had a huge influence on me, because what surprises me is how it's much more sympathetic people who've done terrible things are when you are forced to sit and listen to their side of the story. When a court case begins, you hear the prosecutor, and that's when the most reporters are in the room. This is the stuff that gets covered. This is the stuff that's in the headlines the next day in all the papers. And the prosecutor maps out what they've done. This is the first you hear, that you hear of the crime and the victims and how horrific it all is. And I would be sitting in the court thinking, this person is terrible, this person is almost less than human, this person needs to be removed from society, this person is frightening. But then I'm still there dipping in and listening, and then sitting and listening when this person takes the stand and hearing the story from the beginning and hearing the whole chain of events that led to it. And I can think of I can think very specifically, and I'm aware that there were 2 cases in the entire course of time that I was covering all these crimes when I thought, you're frightening, you're chilling, you're an aberration. Every other case, I was left thinking, if I'd been raised in your family, treated in these ways, pushed to these extremes, this whole chain of events have been mine, can I say hand on heart that I wouldn't have maybe reacted the same if I'd, walked all those miles in your shoes? I would come away feeling that, empathy and understanding. And that I thought was quite interesting. And that made me want to create killers who, it's not that they're sympathetic because they may do terrible things, but it made me want to create murderers who you at least understand where they're coming from and what drives them. Just as a small side note, it's interesting to me in Hong Kong how when they do mitigation at the end of court, where they sort of say, oh, well, they may have done these terrible things, but they also do these good things. Every single one, like triad, hitmen, everybody, they all give money to the family. They always say how much they give a month to the family in mitigation. I always thought it was just a little interesting side note. These people, and you're hearing all these like bloodthirsty acts, but they're always still budgeting away and giving their 500 Hong Kong dollars a month to their mums. So like I say, it kind of gives you these little moments of humanity, I suppose.
Because, of course, much easier to see it in black and white, right? Once you start empathizing with the killer, seeing where they're coming from, that's where it gets trickier and perhaps a little more chilling as well.
Yeah, I have to say, myself, when I read books where the killer is simply some sort of mindless, terrifying psychopath monster, I don't find that as interesting as books where you understand the forces driving them. That's, to me, what is interesting. Because at the end of the day, these are human beings, and their experience and their genetics, the interplay of nature and nurture, led ultimately to that crime. And understanding that, I suppose it is in a way more chilling, because you realize that could be anyone. It's not just some rare, freakish monster, of which there are very few. There's a little bit of anyone capable of these extremes if they've been through that same set of experiences.
Or you, because you just empathize so much that you said, if I had walked in his shoes, I might have done it too.
Yes. Who knows what I'm capable of, Kate?
I mean, something must be ticking lots of boxes because crime fiction is one of the most popular genres, right? Depending on where you look, but it accounts for 25 to 40% of fiction sales. And in the last 5 years, crime fiction has gone up 20% in terms of people buying it. So it's massive. So why do you think it's such a popular genre?
There's the escapism aspect. There's, being taken away into this exciting and dangerous world. There's a puzzle there for people to solve. Everyone likes that. You want to outsmart the detective. And I think also sort of that dark side of human nature that I was slightly referencing earlier, that idea that we're all capable of things if the darker side of our natures is unleashed or pushed forward by forces. The fact that there's a little bit of that inside us, capabilities of things, it's intriguing to read about people who have broken free of the rules that keep us all in check, the concerns, society, laws, and they have broken those rules, broken with the pact with society, and just allow those inner dark forces to come out. There's something compelling about that, that I think everyone is sort of fascinated, that dark side of human nature and what people are capable of.
And it's largely women. I mean, women who are driving the sales of true crime and crime fiction. And yet, I think it's quite interesting that it's actually men who are the most likely to be either the perpetrators or the victims of violent crime. But it's the women who are largely reading these books. Well, why do you have any thoughts on why that is? Why is it such a popular genre with women?
I do find that interesting. I was quite surprised to learn how overwhelming the female market is for this. How it's not even close to 50-50. This is a genre that is largely consumed by women, even though, as you point out, the victims and perpetrators are largely men. I think women are, there's a few things going on. Women are empathetic. They like to dip into other people's lives. So they're interested in understanding. And that puzzle to solve, I think that's particularly a draw. And women trying to work out why people are doing what they do. Women also, it's a chance to kind of experience the danger and excitement of crime. It's kind of like going out with a bad boy. Seeing something, getting something a little bit dangerous into your life. It's attractive, and you can be drawn into that. It's also interesting to me, that men aren't so interested in reading about crime and being spectators in it. But when you look at gaming, they love to put themselves in the crime. They're there sort of, gunning people down and stealing cars, actively involved. Whereas women are more interested in watching and understanding what's going on in the world of crime.
And now, I mean, your book it's crime fiction, but I'm just wondering whether you prefer crime fiction or true crime stories.
I personally, obviously, your books are an exception because they're fascinating and touch on, really, particularly Hong Kong murders, really horrendous, blood-chilling, and very interesting and compelling crimes.
I mean, true that they're blood-chilling, not true that they're wonderful.
Well, the crimes themselves aren't wonderful, but the book is. I find I prefer crime fiction because most criminals just aren't as clever and interesting as the criminals in crime fiction. There aren't really plot twists. They don't cleverly frame people and then find a cunning way to cover their tracks and divert the police. In reality, the average criminal is simply not that bright, or they're panicking, so they make mistakes. I find crime fiction more interesting because you don't know what's going to happen or what's really going on, or whether the whole case has been misunderstood, and at any moment it might all twist, because real life criminals really aren't up for that sort of cleverness. So I prefer fiction. What about you though, Kate? What do you think? Crime fiction versus film?
In terms of the plots and twists, I mean, your crime novel is fantastic. There are so many plots and twists, and we might get to that in a minute without any spoilers. But I think that when you have true crime, well, on one side with true crime, the fact that it's true, I think, is deeply, deeply chilling in a way that you can't beat that for chilling, especially if it's in your hometown. So you can actually walk down a street that the killer walked down, and you can go in the building that the killer went into. And it's just the fact that it's very close to home can give you that spine-tingling thing that, sorry, but if it's made up, you're just kind of like, oh, it's just a story. It's not true. So I think you get the chill factor by the fact that it's a true thing. And then some of the stories, I think, are, yes, I mean, if it's a mundane, sorry to put it like this, but, you know, domestic or something, and it's not too inspired, maybe that is a little dull in terms of a story. But some true crime is quite amazing. I think the sort of things you couldn't make up. I don't know if you remember that first one. I think it was the first story in my murder book where you have Patrick Wong, the playboy, and he and his lover have murdered his girlfriend, and they're getting rid of the body, and they fill up the bath full of acid and corrosive fluid, and all this fluid with body bits is going down the drain, and on the ground floor is this Italian priest who thinks, hey-ho, clearly they're making drugs. So he calls the police to claim that they're actually making drugs, and of course the police bust them and discover the body. But who would have thought, you know, an Italian priest? You would have thought, if that was fiction, and I was reading your book and you had that as fiction, I'd have thought, oh, she's gone a bit far there. So but there can be twists.
Yeah, no, fair point.
For the true.
Yeah, no, that is a very good pitch for the true.
But your story, which is so brilliant, which I just didn't know as I was reading it, which is why we read these books, is the whodunit, right? I just kept flipping backwards and forwards between, I don't want to give anything away, but between was it this person or was it that person? And I wonder, when you were writing it, did you know at the outset, okay, this is the killer? Or, I mean, had you planned it all out? How did that process work for you?
I did not know who it was until quite a way through. In fact, I wrote 3 different versions of the ending because I was swaying back and forth because there were good motives for the various suspects, and I was trying to think through which one of them was most likely to have done it, and I wanted to see which I felt and believed as the ending. So I actually wrote 3 endings and then went with the one that felt right in the end. Apparently Agatha Christie, somebody told me once that Agatha Christie never knew who did it until she was quite a long way through her books, because she thought it would be boring if she knew from the beginning and she wouldn't want to write it. I relate to that a bit. There's always a balance when you're writing a book between wanting to know where you're going and be organized, and wanting to sort of let the story tell itself. And that, I guess it's very different. Different authors will have decided from the very outset who the person is who did it. But I liked not being sure.
I mean, that's a lot of work. So effectively you wrote, from halfway, you then wrote the second half 3 times?
No. I wrote, I would say, the last 3 chapters 3 times. Yeah.
And then you read them, and then you just thought, which one feels right? Which one flowed better?
Yeah. It was also, as I was writing it, one of them felt true, and one of them felt Like maybe I was trying to be a little bit too gimmicky, if you know what I mean. I was trying to be a little bit too clever and unexpected, whereas one of them felt like the truth. And I went with that one.
Okay, so that's why when you're reading it as a reader, you're really not sure, because actually you didn't know either right up until very close to the end.
Yeah, well, that's that. I was quite surprised actually, because it's been out on ebook and I've had a lot of reviews on Amazon. And most people, I mean, all except one, were sort of saying, you know, exactly what you said, where I was flipping back and forth and I didn't know and I couldn't make up my mind right until the end. But I had one who said, oh, I knew from the very beginning. And I thought, really? Because I didn't. So good for you. Because I had no idea.
And just to your comment about Agatha Christie and you relating to her, I don't know where I'm channeling this from, but I seem to remember Agatha Christie grew up in Torquay, was born in Torquay. Don't you have a family connection to Torquay as well?
Yeah. My mother's from Torquay. We used to go back there every summer. Yeah. It's not the sort of place you would think would inspire murder, sort of blue-haired ladies and people playing crazy golf and slot machines and walking on the pier. So you don't really look around and think of sinister forces lurking. But yes, I have that connection to Agatha Christie. Not many other connections to Agatha Christie, but that one.
And was she an author that you read much of when you were younger?
I remember, I suppose. I read, and then there were none. I remember reading that one and Murder on the Orient Express. I remember being quite big with my classmates. We all sort of read it around the same time and passed it around and speculated. So, you know, she was interesting. She didn't get into the psychological life of her characters. This is sort of more me looking back on her. I felt like she had these very interesting, incredibly well-constructed books, and obviously they're fantastic and timeless. But getting into the psychology a bit more is something that I prefer. I do prefer authors who lean a little bit more on that, into the psychological forces and the psychology of the characters a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Well, everything you've said before then kind of leads up to that, the studying psychology, the working in the courts, all now with your background and your life kind of makes sense as to why you've written the book that you have written. And also, of course, your experience of having a daughter who I think is now 12, is she?
She is indeed, yes, she's 12.
Would you let her read the book?
I would not, mainly because there are a couple of sex scenes in it. And right now she's at a stage where when we're watching sort of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if people snog, she covers her hands and asks me to tell her when it's over. So I think she would not want to read a book that her mother had written that has those sorts of scenes in it. Also, she's very easily influenced or made fearful, and I wouldn't want to introduce any new grounds for paranoia or for distrust into her life. So I would rather she wait until she's perhaps 15, maybe. I think 12 is a bit young for this book, so I'd say 15, maybe 16 in her case.
And what about your friends who you know through sort of mum groups, you know, who you've grown up with your daughter? Presumably, I guess they know about this book. Have they read it yet?
I've had some of them read it. They all ask, clearly, you know, the girl who goes missing at the start of the book is called Sophia. I will say, unlike other books where children go missing, she is returned fairly soon. The book is more about what happens after that, and the characters that experience of the child going missing have brought into the main character's life. They all ask me, all of them, it's Caitlin, isn't it? It's your daughter. And yeah, it is really. It's my daughter at 5 years old who I based this child on.
So what was actually the toughest part of writing this book, and how did you get through that?
The toughest part of writing this book is the fact that my main character, the mum, Carrie, suffers from a condition called social emotional agnosia, which you probably haven't heard of. It basically it's facial expression blindness. It's quite common. It affects sort of 1 in 10 people. So you probably have met people who have it. It's a condition that means you can't read facial expression. You're speaking to someone, you can't read that they're bored or irritated or even angry. You can't read tone of voice or body language. It's quite debilitating socially, as you can imagine, which is why my main character is quite lonely and isolated, which makes her sort of easy prey for people coming into her life, because she's a little bit desperate for company and friends and understanding. But writing her from her perspective, you can't say he frowned or he gave her a puzzled look, because she can't make those calls, and I'm writing it from her perspective. So you have to instead break down what that looks like, sort of unfiltered, without that judgment. So I spend a lot of time standing in front of the mirror thinking, okay, he's puzzled. Now what does that look like? Like my eyebrows doing this, and my, creases of my eyes are doing that, and what's my mouth doing? And I would break it down, looking in the mirror, and then in the book, it's just this unanalyzed description of what the face is doing without saying. It's this blind spot that she has where you don't get that interpretation. This is why she's so frightened that she's missed something that has led to her daughter being abducted, because she wasn't able to read the signs. Writing from that perspective, it was challenging, but really quite interesting actually as well. And it gave me a lot of insight into what your face does when you feel different things, because I spent a lot of time looking in the mirror, trying to work it out and break it down and describe it. So that was interesting and that was challenging.
So where did that character come from? Was it someone you've met, or a condition you heard about, or?
Yeah, I heard about the condition. I was actually, to be honest, reading around, looking at sort of different, I suppose, neurodiversity, different things that that affect your perception of things. My daughter's a little bit neurodiverse as well. She's there. The school is looking at having her diagnosed with ASD, which is basically on the spectrum. This character is like that. She is on the what they used to call Asperger's. They don't really use that term anymore, along with this facial expression blindness. I wanted a character who saw the world a bit differently, and I wanted a character who had a blind spot. That meant she was it was a slightly unreliable narrator, I suppose, in that pieces of information were missing, and the reader wasn't quite sure how people were reacting to her, because she wasn't able to provide that information herself. So when I read about this condition, I thought that would be an interesting way of having that incomplete, unreliable perspective. And I also was very interested in thinking how that would feed into her life and her character, reading about it, the loneliness that comes with it, because if you meet someone and they are incapable of reading you and reacting and knowing that they're boring you, or that you're irritated by what they're saying, or even angry, but they don't know, so they plow on. The impact of that condition. So her personality kind of built out of that as I gained more sympathy for her, how it must affect her life. And yeah, I built it from there. She sort of evolved, and as I went through, I got to know her better with each draft.
Yeah, it's a very good device. I don't want to say too much because I'm so worried about giving a spoiler alert here, but it's smart. It's a smart. It does work. It's a good device. Yeah. I'm sure that there are people either in the audience, either here in Taiwan or watching online, who have novels on the go themselves. So I expect they would love to hear how you got your publisher. the holy grail of finding the publisher. How did you get your publisher?
Well, it took a long time. The main reason, and this is the thing you've got to realize as an author, is that there are a lot of things that are completely out of your control. And one of them is trends in the market. And the one that I came up against is a sense in the publishing world that there were too many books of this genre out there, that there were too many. This book is a psychological thriller, and my agent was sending it to publisher after publisher who was coming back saying, "We really like it, good book, but there are too many books in this space. There are too many psychological thrillers right now. We're not really taking any more on. We feel that, people have had enough." But actually, people have never had enough of psychological thrillers. But what happened with me was and my agent did not give up. She's very stubborn. So she kept going and going with it. And by the time we got to sort of the last of the publishers on her list, and it was the last, that whole idea, the world had moved on, the publishing world had moved on, and people no longer felt that there were too many psychological thrillers because they were still doing well and they were still popular. And it had all just sort of changed over the almost year that she'd been sending it out. And she got to the last one, which was Headline Publishing. It's part of Hatchet. And she went for lunch with a senior person who then passed it along to her assistant editor, Katie Sunley, who is a sort of rising star moving up towards becoming an editor herself, who read it and loved it. And she decided that she was going to champion this book. So what happens when someone at a publishing company decides that they want the book is they have to do a whole pitch where they think it fits in the market, and they take it to an acquisition meeting where everybody gathers in a boardroom and all the people are there, marketing and the senior people. And she went in there and she gave a presentation and talked about why she thought this book could be a success and where it would fit in the market. And they said yes. So that was my little hero, my hero, Katie, who fought for this book and loved this book and brought this book out into the world. So there's luck, there's forces in the publishing world that you can't really control, so you just cross your fingers about those. And then there's finding that person who really gets your book and is willing to go to bat for it. And I was lucky enough to find that person.
Yep, so it does sound like a lot of luck and perseverance, and obviously it's assumed that you're going to have to have written a good book to begin with, plus the luck factor. Since we're on the subject of these are tips for writers, how did you find your agent? Have you been with her for long?
I have. I've been with her for a while now. I found her. I went to the Winchester Writers Festival here in the UK. These are good ways, actually, of meeting agents. I know they've all moved online now, of course, but how it works is, and they have other ones that do something similar, which is where you get a one-on-one with an agent who you send them the first chapter or 3 chapters of your book and a synopsis, and they give you feedback, and you have sort of like the agent equivalent of speed dating, where you sit down and they, in theory, have already read it. They should have anyway. And they tell you what they think works, what doesn't work, how it might fit in the market. They're really just kind of meant to be giving you a bit of industry advice and guidance and their thoughts. It's an incredibly useful thing. If you are, I do highly recommend it. If you are an aspiring writer, these are amazing opportunities, even if you're not at the point where you're done and ready to have an agent. They can really give you that invaluable insider take on it. But anyway, I sat down with her, and she, Teresa Chris is my agent, and she said that she wanted to represent me. She had read it. She thought it was, she thought it was original. She said I had a good voice, and asked if she could represent me. And we've been together ever since.
Oh, fantastic. And I've got to ask, I know you've got a full-time job. You've always had a full-time job, and you are a full-time mother as well to a 12-year-old daughter. So when do you find the time to write?
Well, yes, this is the thing. for me, the key is that I have a laptop that fits in my handbag. And I do not have the luxury of, spending my morning sitting, thinking, looking out the window, having my coffee, and then settling down. I don't have a lot of time in my day. So I have a 22-minute train journey. And in that journey, I know it's 22 minutes because I'm like, right, here's my 22-minute writing time. And I will flip open my laptop and I just fall into it for 22 minutes and shut it when I get to my stop. I go to the doctor. They say there's a delay. It'll be 10 minutes, 15. Out comes the laptop. I have to be able to write in quite a piecemeal fashion because it's the only option. I don't. I mean, occasionally on weekends I might have a little stretch of time, but generally I don't. So I have to be able to write in a quite fragmented way as and when I can get a spare moment. So yeah. So the key is having my laptop always with me. Whenever a moment comes along, out comes the laptop, down goes the head, and off to work.
I'm seriously very, very impressed. But you saying that makes me think you must have done a good bit of plotting for the book. I know that the ending, you wrote 3 different endings, but in order to work in those 20-minute bursts, when you sit down within a minute, I'm assuming you must be writing, so you must know as you sit down what you're going to write. So is everything planned in terms of, which characters are in which chapter, which scene is it going to be? Is all that mapped out in advance?
To some degree. This is something I've been playing with because it's the hard balance to strike between this pure creative output, which is can be great fun and can kick up lots of things that you weren't expecting to happen, but can also get a bit disorganized and take you down sort of wrong turns where you end up in delete chapters because they don't quite fit with the plot or they aren't really driving it forward. I will tend to have a list of things that have to happen, and I'll have a list of things, major plot points, and then and I will also have color-coded cards that have, yellow for character, green for things I need to research, blue for, little minor plot points that I've thought of that I want to include somewhere. So I'll have those in kind of a rainbow around my computer to kind of try and keep me on track. And what I will tend to do, and this is so that I can just open the computer and get going, is every time I finish doing a burst of writing, I will think about, okay, what is going to happen next? And I will look at my list of things that have to happen. And I'll think, okay, which one will I have in this scene? And then I will write something as simple as, character X meets character Y. He says something that raises her suspicions, and he suggests she join this group. There's a chemistry. And I'll write something like that. And that is what next time I open my laptop, I will see that. And that's the scene I have to write. If I'm lucky and have enough time, something happens which I call kind of falling in, which is you start writing and initially you're like writing a sentence and she's in this building. And then sometimes this falling in thing happens where you start writing and suddenly it's like you're in the scene and you're watching it happen and you're almost like a spy, or it's I'm sort of like channeling the ghosts of people who don't actually exist. And I'm actually watching, and these people are standing on the roof, and one of them turns, and I'm curious to see what she's going to say. But as she turns and starts speaking, I'm just writing it, and it's this very strange phenomenon of not feeling like I'm thinking of it, just feeling like it's happening, and I'm there recording it. So you'll have a burst of that, and that's the best bit. Then you emerge from that and think, oh, and you read back and you think, I didn't think she was going to say that. That's really interesting, and it can actually shape the course of the book, because I've had sort of things where I'm like, oh, she's so interesting. She was going to be a minor character, but now I need to build her up and go back to my plan and think where I can add her, because she's actually turned out to be a much more intriguing character than I thought. That's just happened to me recently. So yeah, it's kind of, to answer your question, it was a long way of saying it's a combination of organizing, thinking ahead, and allowing that creative process to just happen on its own.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, one last question from me before we move on to questions from the audience, and that is, what are you working on now? Are you working on a novel now? And if you are, is it another crime fiction?
I am working on another novel, provisionally called The Winner. It's about a social media, what I call social media lottery at the triple F, fame, fortune, followers, where what you win is not only sort of a lifetime of money, but also 6 months of Winstagram fame, where you're sort of winning social, like a social media profile, and you give up your life and become these, become a Winstagrammer. And one of the winners starts to notice that the other winners before her, there seems to be a lot of them are going on to suicide and addiction, and she begins to suspect that someone at the contest is pulling strings and that there's something dark going on behind the kind of glitz and glamour of this triple F social media lottery.
Oh, so how far into it are you? Have you got the cards plotted yet, or is it still a brilliant idea?
I'm just over halfway, and there are many cards. Many cards in a rainbow around my computer.
Excellent. Congratulations. Okay, so we have the first of our questions from the audience, and it's from someone who I believe you know, Neil Weston, who, if I remember correctly, was working in the courts in Hong Kong at the same time as you.
Yes. Hello, Neil.
So the question from Neil is, can you talk about the transition from journalist writing to penning a novel?
I suppose the best way to answer that is how the biggest difference between the two. I think it's actually quite freeing to make that transition, because facts are terribly irritating things. And when you're writing a news story, you're stuck with them. Whereas when you get into fiction, you can cast them all off and create it all yourself. The transition to doing that, I suppose, it's about expanding. You don't have to be economical anymore. You can delve into the thoughts of people. You aren't trapped in this world of what they did and what was said and the proof behind it. But you instead can dig around and decide what people actually thought and how they felt, and move into sort of greater description and expansion. So on the one hand, it's fantastic to have been a journalist first, because you've lived in a world of words, and it brings you, when you're covering crime, marvelous material. But it's really quite exciting to be able to take that and transport it into your own world, where you decide what happens and what happens next. It's quite godlike, really. So yes, I suppose that's it. It's the transition is quite easy and quite exciting in a way, because it's just freeing you. It's freeing you from the tyranny of facts.
I can see Neil in the audience, and I think he's chuckling behind his face mask. Okay, we have a question from someone in our online audience. Her name is Isabel. Why do you use the initials CJ instead of your name? So I should say, for anyone who hasn't seen the book yet, so you're using the name CJ Parsons on the cover.
My name is Charlotte Jane Parsons, and I went with CJ Parsons. I made that decision before I knew the information we were discussing earlier about how women were overwhelmingly the readers of crime fiction. Because I had heard, and I spoke to some male friends who said, if I'm being honest, yes, that men are less likely to buy a book in this genre that's written by a woman. So really I was trying to hide my gender a bit there, so that I wouldn't be written off by male readers. It's quite disappointing, really. I don't know why men feel that women, I don't know if they write less interesting crime fiction, or they just can't take us seriously as delving into the dark and violent side of the world. But it is apparently a fact that men find it off-putting when they see a female name on the cover of a crime novel.
And what about female readers? Do they prefer reading women writers or male writers, crime writers? Do you know?
Well, I don't know, but I'd like to think that it doesn't matter. I've never heard that there's any issue with women reading male versus female. I think women are more open-minded in this matter.
Another question from the online audience from Ewan. Which writers have inspired you?
Which writers inspired me? I would say Daphne du Maurier. I love the way she writes, the mysterious, slow revealing of motive and the atmospheres that she creates. And in a completely different genre, but still made me think, Maggie O'Farrell for creating very quickly characters that you care about and can relate to. A book that sort of helped me, because I have short bursts of a child's perspective in The Good Samaritan, a child of 5 going on 6. Room, Emma O'Donoghue, is written entirely in the perspective of a 5-year-old. It's quite famous, the one with a boy who's raised, his mother's being held captive and he's being raised in his shed with her. And it's written completely in his perspective. And that to me sort of showed me that it was possible to maintain interest and dramatic tension from that innocent perspective that came with perhaps a slightly more limited vocabulary and understanding. And I was quite surprised to find that I would say that the chapters I enjoyed writing the most, and there are only a few of them seeded through the book, are the ones from that perspective of the child of 5 going on 6. I really enjoyed writing those. But anyway, that book I really enjoyed and influenced me in that sense.
Great, thank you. A question from Nancy. I'm not sure how relevant it is. The question is, can you talk about translation and the process for you?
Translation? You mean the process of getting the book translated? So what happens, you mean?
Yes. It being in English second fascinates me, it says.
Oh, no, it's in English first. It's only in English. So right now, I only in English. What happens with translation, the process of it, is that normally, I'm not quite sure what's going on now, but there's something, we have these big book fairs, like the Frankfurt Book Fair, where all the industry people gather from around the world. And then the book in English is brought there and shown to all these different people representing publication in all these different countries, and the rights to translation are then sort of sold, and then at that point the book is taken and translated into another language and sold overseas. That has not happened to The Good Samaritan yet, but it's not out yet. It's coming, as you say, it's out in a few days. So I'm hoping that some other countries will be interested, and then I'll get to see it in Italian and Russian and Chinese. That would be good.
That'd be fantastic. Any interest from perhaps it being made into a film? Are you thinking that way? Have you got your Netflix?
Well, I've had a few people, like, the ebook reviewers, I've had a few of them say specifically that they thought it'd be a really good Netflix special. One of them even went as far as to say a good 5-part Netflix. I thought, wow, that's very specific. And my agent actually has a sub-agent who deals with the film and TV side of things, who says she thinks the same and wanted to wait until we got to publication day. But she says she's quite excited to shop it around and give it a go. Obviously, I would love that. It'd be really exciting and very interesting to see how that was brought to life, and to see actors playing those characters. I can't even imagine it, but I think it would be exciting.
Fingers crossed. We have another question from someone in the audience here in Taekwon, and the question is, you mentioned surveillance parenting and that your daughter has a tendency to fear. Anxiety is increasingly prevalent among children these days. Are the two connected? anxious parenting and anxious children?
I think that's fair. I think that's probably entirely true. I mean, I was raised in a world where people weren't talking all the time about sort of stranger danger and all the different risks that are out there. I think you put these ideas into children's heads and it does make them more anxious. My daughter came to me the other day saying, and she's 12, but this anxiety is still there. She's like, I'm really worried about meteors. I said, what? She said, I'm really worried about meteors. And she had heard that a meteor was passing close to the Earth. And I said, oh God, I think that meteor went by last week. And I looked online. I'm like, yes. I said, it was like, thousands of kilometers away. When they say something's a near miss in space, it's far. She goes, phew, I was so worried. And also, oddly, carbon monoxide. She's heard about, from boilers or something. Anyway, these ideas, these dangers, it's a funny balance you have to strike in parenting. You want children to know about dangers and to be able to have the skills to protect against it, to know not to go home with that man or go into that van or, all these things. But at the same time, by talking about it, the idea that the world is full of predators and meteors and carbon monoxide poisoning, it starts to seep into them, and you do start to see this anxiety. It is a great challenge of parenting to try and find that balance between equipping your children to deal with things that you yourself find quite frightening and are worried about, and allowing them to just feel carefree and experience childhood without being worried. So I do think the fact that parents today are more fearful and particularly worried about this idea of abduction, and far more so than they were 20, 30 years ago, I do think that's having an impact. And I do think it makes children more anxious. It's just hard to work out what can be done about it, really, because it's coming from the anxiety of the parents, and it's hard to switch that off.
And I'd just like to say, since we are in Hong Kong, and especially for our Hong Kong audience here, you have a nod to Hong Kong in the book. Although the book is set in London, there is a Hong Kong reference. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I do love Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a really special place in my heart. And I had one of the characters actually was born in Hong Kong and moved to the UK later. But she still has family there. And one of them is an editor at the South China Morning Post. Her sister is still there working as an editor. And in the book, there's sort of they talk about the possibility that she's thinking of actually moving back to Hong Kong and staying with her sister. So I just wanted to have a little cameo to bring my beloved Hong Kong into the book in some way.
And what do you most miss about Hong Kong?
Well, the friends for a start, obviously. The energy of the place, that it's got a charisma, Hong Kong. You probably don't appreciate it so much when you're there, but it's got this, and the energy of the place. I will say on a more practical note, the weather and the junk trips. I do love going out on a junk. Being able to have the sea right there and sort of the urban environment, butting up against the sea. Being able to have islands scattered around you can go and visit. It's a wonderful place. It's an exciting place. It's an energetic place.
And
yeah.
you might not have given this any thought, but this might be the time to start thinking about it. Have you ever thought about setting a crime novel in Hong Kong?
I have thought about that, yes. The tricky bit with that, and this I sort of learned from your book, Kate, Hong Kong Murders, how do you get rid of the body?
I could talk about that for a while.
Yes. Getting rid of the body, committing a murder in Hong Kong, I mean, it'd be very interesting to write about, but a huge challenge just because of the density of the population, the flats, the lack of isolated spots where no one's going to pass by. It would be very interesting to do, but definitely very technically challenging.
Just one thing to say on that is you weight the body down because you've got to ditch it in the sea because as you say, it's a very busy city. So you've got to ditch the body in the sea, and where people always mess up is they don't weight the body down so it floats to the surface. just for when you come to do your Hong Kong crime fiction.
Or for any murderers in the audience who are concerned. Top tip from Kate.
Well, Charlotte, it's been absolutely fantastic having you here. Thank you so much for getting up so early in the morning. Do you have anything to say to your Hong Kong audience and all the people who are looking forward to reading your novel when they can get their hands on it in the next few days? Anything to say?
Well, thank you for taking an interest, and thank you for the murderers, because some of them aren't so bad on the inside.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte. I'm just going to hand it over to Angela to have a final word.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was really fascinating, and also to Charlotte. You're always going to be Charlotte to me, not CJ. Of course, murderers in Hong Kong usually get caught when they leave the bodies in suitcases on their balcony, or they wrap them in carpets and stick them in the car park. But anyway, there we are. If they'd just listened to Kate, they wouldn't be caught quite so quickly, I suppose. So thank you very much. And of course, I love crime fiction. And when I was a news editor for the Times in London, I was on the desk when Robert Black was being tried in London, and also Fred and Rosemary West, and you couldn't make that up for sure. So thanks again, thank you both. And so the festival concludes today, and I'd like to remind everybody that this event and all 52 of our online events will be available to watch on demand until the end of this month. And after 48 hours, this interview will be translated, well, it'll be online with Chinese subtitles, which is great. So please stay with us, audience, for today, the final day. And if you're a fan of crime fiction, and I think if you're watching this interview, you are, don't miss the Vera and Shetland series author, Anne Cleves, and she's appearing this afternoon at JCQ. And then our last event is going to be a poetry love fest with Hong Kong's most celebrated English language poets, do tell, and the secondary school winners of our Urban Love Poetry Contest. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Charlotte. Go back to bed.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.